Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, we'll move straight ahead now to our discussion segment, which we have a topic which we will be considering right about now, which has to do with evaluating lawmakers' performance, the Ninth Assembly. And with that, we will be looking at, in less than 2 weeks, the curtain will fall on the Ninth National Assembly, with new members warming up for their inauguration and the contest for the leadership of the 10th Assembly taking the center stage. The question is, how far has the outgoing lawmakers fared in the discharge of their legislative function, especially in the area of lawmaking, which is their core function? Senate President Ahmed Lawan has bemoaned the rubber stamp stigma on the 9th National Assembly by Nigerians, declaring that the 9th National Assembly has performed better than those before. According to him, the rubber stamp stigma on the 9th Assembly has misperception and misunderstanding by some Nigerians who wrongly labeled it so. Speaking on the legislative activities of the 9th Assembly, Lawan said that as of July 2022, a total of 874 bills have been introduced at the stage of first reading, out of which 162 passed the third reading and 104 concurred to by the House of the Representative and assented by the President. According to him, the 9th Assembly targeted various timely legislative intervention to address the myriads of problems confronting Nigeria. And of course, joining us to analyze and of course give a more insightful understanding of these is our guest and the person of Mr. Matthew Oliku, who is a public affairs analyst. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, let's look at the review of the performance of the 9th Assembly. What can you say honestly when it comes to its primary function? Have they been able to carry it out professionally as it ought to?
I will not look at it from one perspective. I will look at it from 2 or 3 areas, because you agree with me that the National Assembly, their responsibility is not limited to oversight. They equally have the responsibility of lawmaking. But for me, if you look at the area of lawmaking, and again, I think National Assembly is the engine room of any democracy. Because if the National Assembly performs its responsibility the way it ought to do it, that is what will engender good governance. Then looking at the area of lawmaking, I will say that the 9th National Assembly did well.
In what sense?
In the sense that before now, there are some areas of legislation that needed priority attention, that have lingered from the inception of this national democracy to...
Please, you're just going to hold your thought now. Let's quickly go for this short break, and when we return, we'll continue with that. Please don't go nowhere. Thank you so much for joining us, and of course, we apologize for that little mix-up. Mr. Oluko, you were saying something regarding the rule of law.
So, no, I was actually trying to say that in terms of lawmaking, that the 9th Assembly, for me, performed well. And I was trying to prove a point that if you look at this national democracy since 1999, we have battled with the issue of petroleum industry bill. And it have lingered since 1999 until we had this 9th Assembly. Every effort of the previous National Assembly to pass the petroleum industry bill have always failed. And we have always had this issue of the oil majors trying to sabotage it, using influence, the money and all that to ensure that the bill did not stay through, because it has so much to do with local content. And to the credit of this 9th Assembly, they were able to pass it, and Mr. President assented to it. And that's why you can see that NNPC is now a public limited liability company, no longer as it used to be. Having said that, if you equally look at the area, you know that in Nigeria, people have been yearning for devolution of power. There is every need for federal government to remove some of the items on the exclusive legislative list to the concurrent list. And you can only do that by legislation. And only recently, we understand that some bills, National Assembly was able to pass some bills that has to do with devolution of power. And talking specifically about railway, which Mr. President have assented to. That bill empowers the state governments to build railway. And before now, you cannot build railway as a state government because it fell under the purview of federal government. Hence, it is in the exclusive legislative list.
Yeah.
You can equally look at the issue of power. We all know the importance of power in any economy, especially like our economy, where federal government have to deliver on the promises we have been getting in every administration in terms of increasing our level of power generation. Only recently, we were equally made to understand that the bill that seek to remove it from exclusive legislative list to concurrent list have been passed, and Mr. President have assented to it. So to that extent, any state that wants to generate, transmit, and distribute electricity, even areas that is covered by national grid, are now empowered by law to do so. So there are so many other areas like the issue of correctional facility that have now been removed from exclusive list to concurrent list. A situation where you see almost all our prisons are so much congested, and the federal government may not have what it takes to shoulder all the responsibility of managing the facilities. It have now been removed from exclusive list to concurrent list, meaning the state houses of assembly can legislate on it and the governors can invest in it. So what I'm trying to say in essence is, to an extent, when it comes to issue of devolution of power, that have been the bane of our own development. And Nigeria have been yearning that there is need for devolution of power. Because before now, you have about 68 items on the exclusive legislative list. And people have been talking, there have been conversation around it, asking federal government that they should divorce some power. And you cannot divorce those power except through legislation. And we are seeing that this National Assembly have been able to come up with laws to remove some of these items on the exclusive legislative list. But again, there's the issue of, though that one is not the fault of National Assembly, I'm talking about the local government autonomy and local government autonomy and financial autonomy and legislative autonomy. They have never been, that one was passed, but you know you needed to get concurrence of 24 states to tell majority of the states for it to come back to the National Assembly before it goes to President for assent. Then again, there's this issue of judicial autonomy in terms of judicial financial autonomy at the level of the states. That one was equally passed. So if you look at all these bills that scaled through in this National Assembly, in this night assembly, and Mr. President has sent into most of them, I think they tried. But again, the area they failed woefully. That's why I say I'm not going to address it holistically. I'm going to take it piecemeal as going is concerned. The area I feel they failed woefully is the area of oversight. They didn't perform well at all, because if you look at section 89 of the 1999 Constitution as amended, it empowers National Assembly to invite any Nigerian for evidence in any area they have power to make law. And if you look at section 80 and section 81 of the same 1999 Constitution as amended, it empowers the National Assembly to oversight the executive. And I don't think there's any area you can beat your chest to say that National Assembly have been able to carry out that responsibility of oversight, because that is what will engender check and balance. If they were doing their work in the right way, in the right manner, I don't think they will fold their hands and allow federal government against all odds borrow to the extent we have seen, because it's part of their responsibility when it is of public interest. Because I don't think it's of public interest that federal government would have borrowed up to what they have borrowed. Look at the way and manner federal government have abused the window of opportunity created by ways and means through which you borrow from CBN to finance budget deficit. So if they were up and doing in their responsibility, I don't think they would have allowed that. So you can trace every area of human endeavor that failed in this administration to lack of oversight. It is lack of oversight because if you appropriate fund, you have right to oversight how it's being managed. If a budget is under execution, you have right to oversight to ensure that it meets the standard. You have right to oversight and ensure that the money being appropriated is being used for the purpose. Look at the issue of insurgency, terrorism. In this country, we had under this administration a situation where the federal government borrowed, not borrowed anyway, withdrew 1 billion naira from SS crude accounts. And this money was appropriated by National Assembly. And we understand that about 400 and something million out of that total amount was used to buy 12 Tucano jets. But to what extent do National Assembly oversight to ensure that that money was actually used for the purpose? Because we can see that insurgency is not abating. The federal government is not able to address it. So if you are spending that much, somebody is approving the money, and the person had the power of oversight, is not oversighting, then how then can you hold the people who are in the field, who are doing the operation to account? So for me, in terms of oversight, they failed woefully.
All right. We're still talking about oversight and things that could have been done better and more properly. If you would compare the 9th National Assembly to the previous assemblies that we've had, you just mentioned things that they could have done better. Part of that oversight conversation that we're very concerned about is the NDDC hearing. Till today, we do not know how that case had been concluded. Has anybody been brought to book, and where are we taking it? Would you also count that as a problem from the oversight area?
It's part of is one of the many areas they failed in their responsibilities. Because if you are you see, if anytime we see National Assembly come up with investigation, we seldom see them conclude it to a logical conclusion, carry it to a logical conclusion. So it shows that along the line, they may have compromised their responsibility. So it goes to say that when they even attempt to oversight, is an opportunity to perhaps get their own cake out of it. Because if you attempt to carry out an oversight and you end it halfway, and the society, the public, they were seeing light along the line, you'll be left with no option than to speculate that they may have compromised.
Okay, but would you account that to some of the challenges that they've had to face also on their own end that we cannot blame them for? And what
no, it's not a challenge that we cannot blame them. We can accuse them or we can speculate that they compromised. Because what makes it a challenge? You have and the way the Constitution makes it, no one is even oversighting the National Assembly. And they have power to oversight almost everybody. So if you fail in your responsibility to oversight the executive, it's not a challenge. It's simply because you compromise in doing carrying out your responsibility. That is why I see it.
Now, what's your view as regards the executive, especially the presidency, when it comes to the rule of law? Do you think the Senate, the 9th Assembly, have done well, especially with making sure that the president adheres to certain rules of laws given by the judiciary?
I don't even think it behoves on the legislatures to enforce and compel the executive to comply with the rule of law. I think it has to do with someone being responsible. Because you can imagine a situation where a court of competent jurisdiction will give an order and federal government will flout it. The person will go to court to obtain a garnishing order. A garnishing order is one that compels federal government to obey an initial order. The government will still flout it. In that circumstance, I don't think there's much National Assembly can do to compel the executive to obey it. We have seen so many cases where government will give an order, federal government will start citing national security as an excuse. But for me, I think the right thing to do in such circumstance is to appeal such order if you know you are not obeying it, rather than citing national security and leaving it there and you are not complying with it. So for me, I don't think the National Assembly have what it takes to ensure that federal government conforms itself to the rule of law. But I think it's honorable for any president to conform his office and even himself to the rule of law, because the same constitution that gives effect to your office gives effect to the office of those judges that give that judgment. So for me, we look at what happens in better democracy. Look at as decisive as Trump. Under Trump, a correspondent of CNN was evicted from, was sent away from the government house, yes. White House. The media house went to court ordered his restatement, and without, it's irrespective of your opinion, the man was reinstated. So that is what we want to see happen here.
Okay, so why I'm saying this is because if you look at the 8th Assembly as against the 9th Assembly, remember the Speaker was Bukola Saraki, right, who was the Speaker of the National Assembly. We saw the role he played, especially with compelling the executive to be able to assent to certain law or even adhere to certain existing law, which to some extent he was accused of playing the opposition while in the same party. Now we're not saying that in the case of the 9th Assembly, which is headed by Ahmed Lawan, of course, which gave rise to the reason he was being accused of a rubber stamp. So what do you think about such kind of relationship that existed within the 9th Assembly as against the 8th Assembly?
I think I equally agree that the 9th Assembly is a two-tailed bulldog in terms of oversight. I totally agree with that. Then, because the reasons are not far-fetched. You have a situation where there will be an issue that is of public interest, and the public will be against it. But once it comes from the office of the president, I don't think the 9th Assembly will want to be in the bad book of the executive. Perhaps that is the reason. Because look at the issue of this recent approval of the is it 22 trillion naira that has to do with the war means approval that the whole public was against. Look at the speed of life with which National Assembly gave approval. So it shows that anything that comes from executive goes. And that does not augur well for our democracy. To not deepen our democracy, it will not engender check and balance. Because at the same time, we're talking about the expenses that has to do with that ways and means. Who scrutinize it? Has it been scrutinized? These are questions, conversation we were having before you knew it. They went and gave it approval. So for me, I strongly believe that National Assembly is a toothless bulldog, especially in the area that federal government have interests.
But what would you think have put them in that position? If I'm to repeat your word, toothless bulldog, because you also mentioned earlier that nobody oversights them. So that kind of puts checks and balances in a tight corner. Do you think that has engendered what we are seeing today with the 9th Assembly? I mean, in the place that people are, the public are now looking at them as a rubber stamp. I'm sure that situation has lingered. Every other assembly has not had anybody checking or oversighting them. And then this assembly, the 9th Assembly, is taking advantage of that to do whatever it is that you're doing. Do you think that, that is what fosters this?
No, in Nigeria, the president is too powerful. Too powerful because he controls the resources. He controls the armed forces. And apart from controlling these two things or these two areas, the way Nigerian system runs, it runs in such a way that Mr. President can do anything and go away with it. You could recall in the case of Onoha, against all odds, Onoha was removed from office. Not because perhaps they follow all due process, But because Mr. President may have bought into the idea of getting the man out of office. So in the same vein, I don't think anybody wants to be in the bad book of the office of Mr. President. I think that best explains the reason people are easily whipped into line. You cited the issue of Saraki as a leader of the National Assembly. Don't forget that if you look at the way Amana Saraki lost election when he wanted to return to the National Assembly, it may not be unconnected to the role he played in trying to engender check and balance in that 8th Assembly. So for me, I think anybody that goes there is, if you want to do the right thing, it's often better to do the right thing anyway, but you would have known that there are sacrifices to be paid. So I think most Nigerians are not ready to pay such sacrifice. That is why they always want the executive to have their way. It's not even restricted to the national level. What we are discussing is goes around
across board.
All the local government, at the state level is operational. I'll give you an instance. Look at the issue of local government autonomy, both their financial autonomy and legislative autonomy. You know that as it stands today, local government do not have legislative autonomy. 6 houses of assembly can impeach the local government chairman because they don't have legislative autonomy. And National Assembly passed that bill recently, but it didn't get concurrence from state houses of assembly. So Mr. President could not assent to it. The reason is not far-fetched because the governors at that level didn't want it to say true. So to tell you that the governors at the level macromanage what happens at the state houses of assembly, the same way you see it happening in Abuja. So it goes to show that we have not grown to the level where our institutions will be strong. What we have is strong individuals and not strong institutions. I will cite the issue of Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu, as a serving prime minister, was questioned 5 times by Israeli police on issues that borders on corruption. That is an environment where democracy is thriving. So here, who is police IG, with due respect anyway, to someone, Mr. President, on issue that borders on investigation, whatever nature anyway?
Now, looking at the shenanigans that we saw being displayed at the 9th National Assembly, you're making reference to the fact that this could be the fear of not being in the bad book of the president. Could it be because the president, to some extent, has a lot of power, especially with influencing who becomes the Speaker of the Senate Assembly, which makes it impossible for these guys to be able to carry out their constitutional requirements and primary duties as the Speaker of the National Assembly, as against what we saw in the 8th Assembly?
No, Mr. President, this current Mr. President, Muhammadu Buhari, was not even too interested in foisting leadership on the National Assembly. But again, the way the system runs, you see people who are around Mr. President, they are even the one who call the shots, who exert those influence. You see, it may not be Mr. President directly. But I don't think this current president-elect will fold his hands and watch and allow leadership emerge naturally. But however I look at it, National Assembly is supposed to be a different arm of government, distinct from the executive, distinct from the judiciary. So to that extent, they were supposed to operate independently. That is not to say that they cannot have synergy. Synergy is not to say that you submit your authority to the executive. You become an appendage of the executive. But unfortunately in Nigeria, in some areas, especially in the area of oversight, that's what we are seeing.
Now, looking at the 10th Assembly that we're about to have now established, are we likely to see the appendage of the Senate Assembly as regards the executive arm?
We are likely going to see more of a toothless National Assembly.
Why do you say so?
Because currently, we're already seeing a zoning arrangement. We're already seeing somebody who is anointed. And if you get that position on the basis of that anointing, what do you expect from such leadership? Don't forget that National Assembly have the right to ask, to look at Mr. President in the face and tell Mr. President, this expenditure is not in tandem with the appropriation. As such, is impeachable. Can a Senate president that is anointed and got the position on the basis of anointing, look at the Mr. President in the face and tell him that? I don't think so.
If you call it anointing, that means it's not the constitutional way to pick out a Senate leader.
No. Don't look at it from this angle. It is anointing because, to the public glare, we are already aware that there is a zonal arrangement that will zero in on an individual. That is not to say they are not going to do the normal voting. They will do the voting, but they would have, like we read on the basis of newspaper today, that even I'm talking of Akpabio, that he have started reaching out to agreed members. So invariably, at the end of the day, they will be voting. But even the people who anointed him are helping him to reach out to agreed members to share their sword.
This zoning arrangement, is it constitutional? That is the major question.
You may not say it's not constitutional, you may not say it's constitutional. Because don't forget that the Constitution talks about federal character. And federal character, if you look at the spirit and nature of federal character, you understand that it has something to do with ethnic balancing and even religious balancing. Because the Constitution frowns at a situation where one ethnic group or one religion, or however you look at it, will dominate governance. That is what that constitutional provision seeks to address.
Right. We don't have much time right about now. Would have allowed you to give us more information as regards this. Thank you so much, Mr. Matthew Oluko, for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure. It's my pleasure being here.
All right, that was Mr. Matthew Oluko, public affairs analyst, giving us insightful thoughts on this issue as regards the review of the performance of the 9th Assembly. Well, the show is not over yet, as we will be transiting into yet another interesting segment, the finance segment with Charles Fakro, and that'll be right after this time out. Please don't go nowhere.